Hello, my name is Bonnie Stelmack. I'm a professor in the Faculty of Education at the University of Alberta. This presentation was created with the novice researcher in mind, but it may be a helpful refresher for master's or doctoral students who are later in their programs. I've often heard education students and practitioners refer to quantitative research as more legitimate because it has numbers and it's objective. This, despite the fact that many narratives of people's experiences have inspired policy change in education. Policies around gender-neutral washrooms in schools, for example, emerged from an Alberta student's experience with lack of choice. But what is the difference between qualitative and quantitative research? After watching this screencast, you should be able to distinguish between quantitative and qualitative studies. Outside of academia, genres of writing can be identifiable by looking at their structure. You probably know when you're reading a poem versus a short story or an essay, right? The key distinction between qualitative and quantitative studies is actually the assumptions about what is knowledge and what is reality, epistemology and ontology. Discussing epistemological and ontological assumptions and paradigms is beyond the scope of this presentation, admittedly, but I wanted to point this out because it is the defining feature of these approaches. What we call a study, whether it is quantitative or qualitative, it's important to understand how we can identify these. A research study aims to collect data on phenomenon, either directly through quasi-experiments, for example, or indirectly, perhaps by observing people. How those data are analyzed marks the difference between quantitative and qualitative. Quantitative studies use analysis techniques like statistical regression, ANOVA, ANCOVA, MANOVA, terms that may be quite foreign to you. Quantitative studies follow a deductive process of looking at the research data. This involves starting with an hypothesis and working to disprove the null hypothesis. When you see language such as this in Adams and Adigan's study, you know you're in the quantitative territory. How do you know when you're in the qualitative territory? Well, qualitative studies also want to understand social phenomenon, but they don't aim to find causation or even correlation. They aim to gain insights. When you see language such as this was a qualitative multi-case study, it makes it very obvious. But you can also tell from the data collection. As in Coviello and DeMatthews' study, they claimed data were derived from semi-structured interviews, observations of school board, public meetings, and document collection. So you can see that there is no fancy statistical language there. Just like there are visual cues in reading English literature, poem versus story, if you see tables such as this, you know that you're in the quantitative realm of research studies. You can see at the bottom in the notes, the p-value, that's the statistical significance, and you see all kinds of fancy language there, descriptive statistics and bivariate correlations. That's pretty telling that this is a quantitative study. An erroneous assumption is that if you see numbers reported in a study, it must automatically be quantitative. This is false. Remember that it's the way that data are analyzed that marks the difference. Quantitative studies use deductive reasoning, whereas qualitative studies use inductive reasoning, which means there is no hypothesis as a starting point. Conclusions are drawn from the data themselves. Notice here in Coviello and DeMatthews' study, however, that there is a table with numbers. Qualitative studies may use data collection tools like surveys, just like quantitative studies, but there is no fancy statistical analysis that's used. Measures of central tendency like average, mean, and median are more popular and may be used primarily to provide context. Here, in this table, the researchers are painting a picture of the ethnic composition of the school authorities that were involved in the study, because this could make a difference to the interpretations of the data for the reader. What you will see a lot of in qualitative studies is quotations from participants as what they say is evidence for interpretations that researchers make about a set of data. As you can see here, the arrow is pointing to something that a participant from the study said. In sum, what we call empirical studies are research studies where data have been collected. The assumptions driving the study may emerge from a quantitative or qualitative paradigm. It's important that you don't simply define quantitative research as that which expresses findings in numbers and qualitative as studies that express findings in words. Nonetheless, you can tell by some of the features of a published study whether it fits into the quantitative or qualitative realm. It can be helpful for the reader if you briefly mention, when you are citing a study, that the study is based on quantitative or qualitative data, because it can make a difference to the extent to which findings can be generalized or simply transferred based on the reader's decision about how their context aligns with the context of the study. You may wish to look at the studies referenced in this presentation to enhance your understanding. Thank you for watching this screencast.